folks, and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshifted.net/350. Email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109. Check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 350th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are going to explore some bike adventure goals for 2024. If you've been with the show for a little while, you know that last year I set up a whole bunch of bicycle touring goals, and this year I'm going to say bike adventure goals because that's how we're, widening out the scope of the show a little bit. And I've broken them down into a bunch of different categories here. And I'm doing this to put it out there for you as well for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned last year, there are tons of different interesting studies that suggest that making goals make you more apt to achieve them. Writing them down makes it even more so. And then the biggest thing is telling somebody else what your goals are. So this is a little accountability situation. Last year, I hit almost every single one of them. And the ones that I didn't hit, well, there were either good reasons why I didn't, or they didn't really, fit my needs. You know, when you set a goal at any given point in a year, your priorities may change. And I think that was certainly the case for 2023 for at least a couple of the ones. But, things like new tours, crossing states by bike, I managed to hit every single one that really mattered to me. And so I think this is a great exercise. I'm going to do it for me, obviously. It's relevant because it impacts the show, but I also do this to encourage you to make some bike goals, some bike adventure goals, or just adventure goals or life goals for yourself as well. And make sure you do those things where you make the goals, you write them down, and then you tell somebody else about them. Because like I said, far more likely that you end up hitting the marks. Take a mid-year review as well. We'll be, I think, doing that again this year, especially if I run out of stuff to talk about. That's always a good episode to do. And then, reflect on them at the end of the year. So let's just jump right into it for 2024. I've got 3 different categories, and a couple of the categories have subcategories underneath them. And so we will go through them all. Big category number 1, new experiences in bike travel. This is probably something that you would expect from me. My goal is to plan at least 3 bike trips to destinations I have never visited before, or some other way where it's a different way of doing it. And that could be a different route, a different trail, a different experience. But the idea here is that there are going to be 3 brand new experiences in bicycle travel this particular year. It's going to include local hidden gems, could include longer journeys. These are all of the various things. I mean, something about it's got to be new for at least 3 of my trips this year. Good news is I think I got one of them already ready for you coming very, very soon. The one other thing that I'll mention about making goals is you want to make them specific and you want to make them measurable. This one's specific-ish, I would say. I think I'm giving myself a lot of wiggle room with the concept of what is a new experience, but you follow the idea. The measurable aspect of all of this is that I've got to be able to track and document the new places that I travel or the new ways that I travel them with photos and a travel journal. But I'm also going to throw something out a little bit more there. I'm going to try to do a little bit more video this year as well. So it's a sub goal here. I'm not going to do video the way that I've done it in the past. And if you haven't seen some of my videos, for instance, like the Katy Trail, that's probably the one where I did the most work on. That was, a bunch of years ago, but it's still pretty cool. It was a lot of extra work, and it was a lot of me talking and yakking at the camera. And as I reflected a little bit on this particular goal and what I want to do with video, I decided that I want to do video a little bit different than how I do the podcast. You hear enough from me on this show. You hear my voice plenty. So the way I'm going to approach video for these new trips, and I can't promise it's going to be every single one, but my hope is I'm going to be doing this a lot more, and you may or may not have seen this. If you spend any amount of time on YouTube, there's a style of video where there's no narration whatsoever, no spoken narration. There may be some subtitles, but for the most part, you're just experiencing the visuals and the audio of what's going on around you. And I really like watching those videos, and I thought, why don't I try doing that as well? The nice thing is that I think it's a nice compliment in either direction. If you stumble upon that video and you're like, oh, wow, this looks like a really cool bike trip, well, then you can go to the podcast and listen to me yak about it. If you hear me yak about it on the podcast, you may want to experience some of the visuals that I have. So that's a sub goal here in the new experiences in bike travel. So I'm excited for it. Now ask me again when I'm like, I have no time and I'm trying to pull this thing together with no time. I think that one thing I should do is set expectations. You should not necessarily expect that if I do video, that it's going to come out anywhere near the release of the audio. Audio, a little peek behind the sausage factory here. Audio is really quick and easy to produce for me. Video is a lot more. There's a lot more effort. There's more shots to think about. There's more cuts and edits, and it's a thing. So I'm going to get you some video this year. If you're interested in it, you don't have to, but it's also going to be something that's not necessarily always timed with the release of the audio podcast. So it's going to always be a little bit of an extra. Okay, so that is goal number 1 broadly, new experiences in bike travel. That one's easy. The next one that I want to talk about is exploring and enjoying my trips more. And this is something that I think that comes out of some of the episodes we did at the end of 2023, talking about approaching these trips with some more mindfulness components to it. I'm still going to be doing the mindfulness episode in an upcoming episode at some point this spring, probably. But I really wanted to try to come up with a few different goals around enjoying these types of things a little bit more. So I'm going to try to incorporate unique activities or experiences. So the goal there is adding at least one unique activity or experience to every single trip that I do. So that's going to be one of a variety of different things. Here's some examples. Could be trying some local cuisine, especially something that I've never had before, participating in some kind of a community event in the places that I'm traveling to, doing some kind of a real deeper dive on a historical site, exploring that aspect a little bit more. Then it's going to be something, there's going to be at least one unique activity for every single one of my trips coming on in the future in 2024. The measurable aspect of all of this is I'm going to record this in, of course, the podcast form, potentially also the video format, and I'm going to give it a pedal shift ranking. Of course, we all know that the pedal shift ranking is 1 through 10, but you do get 44 stars for a truly awesome experience. So 1 through 10 or 44 for the overall enjoyment of these unique experiences. So that is something that I really think could be fun. So at least one cool, unique thing, not necessarily every episode or every day, but at least one kind of unique thing in each trip. And I'll make sure that I try to highlight that for you as we go along here. The next sub goal to exploring and enjoying the trips more is to plan as one of them a low mileage, slow paced tour. You probably remember in recent episodes, I've talked about that. It's going to be a tour that emphasizes slow travel, which means we're talking low daily mileage, and it's going to be really focused on scenery, enjoying the scenery and whatever it may be, enjoying local culture and really engaging in all of that. And so what that's going to be in terms of a measurable aspect is I think we're going to just be planting a flag for that particular adventure. It's going to have a no more than 30 miles a day type of ride that allows for more exploration and more time. And that's going to be a really key component of it. At least one tour is going to, when I do the statistics at the end, the miles biked will be much lower than normal, and not because it's a Nero or a 0 day. It's going to be baked in the cake. So a slow travel tour is another sub goal here. Engaging with local communities. And I've talked a little bit about this in one of the earlier ones, but the idea here is that I'm going to try to have a goal of interacting with local communities during a tour, including maybe staying at a local guest house or Airbnb, dining at family-owned restaurants, really getting into the local aspect of any particular tour. I feel like I try to do this, but I don't think I do that with intention the same way that I would like to for this particular goal. The measurable aspect of all of this will be, highlighting when I'm doing something local. It's going to be, whether I'm staying at a particularly local place, maybe something that is semi-famous or whatever. Dining at places that are like, oh, if you're going through this town, you must eat here, that kind of a thing. Community events, again, that's something that usually I don't have time for, but you'll notice that that's a component for a few of these goals. So I'm going to try to make that happen. And I got a couple of different ideas of how that might end up being a thing, but stay tuned. 2024. Next up is documenting the journey. And this I already talked about. And that is to try to make sure that in terms of my enjoyment, that I'm making sure that I've got something that I can look back on. Making sure that obviously I'm doing this through the podcast. That's baked in the cake. But I'm going to try to do the video stuff as well. And maybe even get back into some of the storytelling. For those of you who have been with the pod for a very long time, one of my first episodes, I think it was episode 9 maybe, was just telling one of my favorite stories. It's called The Sweater. If you've never heard it before, go check out episode 9 of the Pedal Ship Project, or 009, because we had double leading zeros back in the day. That was definitely something that I'd like to get involved with. And of course, that could come through video, that could come through audio, through blogging, perhaps. We do have pedalshift.net. I don't tend to write a lot there anymore, but maybe I will do that a little bit more for all of this. So that's documenting the journey here as a sub goal of exploring and enjoying the trips more. So sum up the second larger goal here. We're talking about incorporating unique activities or experiences. We're going to do a plan a low mileage, slow pace tour, slow travel, emphasizing that. We're going to have a goal here of interacting with local communities. And so we're talking about engaging with local communities in some way, shape, or form. And of course, documenting the journey as a piece of all of that. So again, some of these goals overlap a little bit, and I think that is a good thing. Is that cheating? Is it hashtag cheating? I don't know. All right. Last but not least, for goal number 3, and this one may shock some of you that it was number 3 and not number 1 with the amount I've been talking about it in the last couple of months here. Since the interview with Biking Brian, I have been on a bit of a deep dive on e-bikes, and particularly e-bikes that are like Brian's, that are long range capable. And I know this is a goal. I am going to attempt to research and build a new e-bike with long distance range, not unlike, perhaps I should say, inspired by Biking Brian's setup. So we have some sub goals here. Goal number 1. Let's see. I have these probably a little bit out of order. The goal number 1, I'm going to read my third one that I have listed here, because I think that's the one that has to come first. Build a bike focusing on comfort and durability, including a comfortable seat, ergonomic handlebars, and a robust frame. You can tell that ChatGPT helped me out a little bit with that. Good old Sam, smarter than me. What was it? Smarter alternative to me, helped me with some of these here. The idea here is that you got to start with a good base, and that is to make sure that I've got the correct bicycle for this. I wanted to emphasize comfort as a piece of all of this, and I think this is going to be my most upright type of riding style of any bike that I've got. I would say that the Brompton is probably very similar to that, but I do think that if we're going to be talking about like really, really long days in the saddle, I do think that comfort and safety and durability is going to be a major thing here. That is why we are going to be rocking that type of a thing with a bike. That's the thing that we've got to build in the first place, or purchase in the first place. So the measurable aspects of all of this, kind of just what's the best way of putting this? The nature of the bike's creation or purchase is going to hit all of these marks. I'm going to be selecting, obviously, something with a frame that balances weight and strength. That's going to also consider the material that I end up having for it. Steel is real for a very long time, but I'm certainly going to be open to other types of bicycle frame materials too. Interesting concept here. Suspension came up in some of my research here. At first I was sort of like, absolutely no, I don't need any front suspension or rear suspension or anything like that. However, I am going to be open to the possibility that might be something to take a look at, especially if I'm going to be looking at something other than asphalt or paved surfaces. Some of the terrains that I would consider for this bike, I'm like I said, I'm skeptical that I'm going to be doing something like that, but it's everything will be considered as part of all of this. Seating and handlebars, I'm going to make sure that I'm choosing good, high quality stuff, ergonomic seating, handlebars that work for the needs that I have. And I had good old mysterious James here at the cabin for a couple of visits over the last few weeks in and around the holidays. And we talked a lot about handlebar setup for such a beast, and I'm intrigued with some of the different layouts and ways that I would be able to carry things, because as one of the other goals we'll talk about in a moment here, the battery has a lot to say about where I'm going to be carrying things. And believe it or not, the handlebar is certainly one of those things. All you bike packers, I'm coming to you for advice on some of this stuff too. All right, so that's the goal of building the bike that is the right bike for this type of ride, this type of goal, the e-bike with long range. So the next thing that you might think is an important thing, that's a sub goal here, is selecting a mid-drive motor that balances efficiency and power for this particular ride. Now, we talked about what a mid-drive motor is for these types of bikes. It's down there in the bottom bracket. It's way more efficient than a hub-based motor. I'm fully convinced that's the direction that I need to go in for all of this, but they make them in a lot of different flavors, a lot of different manufacturers. Some are better than others, so going to be doing a lot of research in there. Then you also have to think about what the power output of that motor is. Some can range, very low to very high, and you would think, oh, we'll just pick a really high because that gives you the most power. Well, then we start getting into questions of efficiency, because the higher the battery, the higher the output of your motor, the more juice you need from that battery. So we got to pick the right thing there. And so the mid-drive motor choice is another goal that's a part of all of this. Last but not least, as you would probably expect, we got to figure out the whole battery situation. I think that I am going to follow the path that Biking Brian did, and I've already done some research on this, and of course I'll bring you along for the ride as we do more episodes of this in the future. But the battery setup, there are commercially available batteries in the size capacity that Brian's got. But interestingly, and when we talked a little bit about this, and I don't want to go too much into the weeds, they use some of the older power cells that don't have as much capacity to weight ratio going on there. So a lower capacity of battery for the weight and bulk that it has. So these batteries are enormous. They tend to go in those Hanson cab type of rides that you may see in any given city. And they're enormous. They're like 2 car batteries next to each other, way too big to be able to pull off and all this. But when you plug in the types of cells that Brian used, then you can start to get a much more dense battery for volume and weight, and that's the sweet spot. So I'm going to be really working on all of that. Goal there is to try to get a battery that can get about 120 miles per charge. That, of course, is a very variable number based on conditions, so I almost even hesitate to throw that out as a measurable part of the goal. But I think that the battery capacity is, we're going to be looking at 1,500 watt hours. That may mean nothing to you in the moment. It may mean more to you later, depending on how much of it ends up in the show. But we will be bringing along Sam for the ride on that, because Sam and the integrated Watts wizard that I built through AI is going to be a hugely important component for all of this. So much more to come in future episodes. In terms of timing on this e-bike, I don't think that this is something that's going to be really started in earnest much this winter. I think some early research is certainly going to be happening here on this side, but I've got some other things that are going to be, shall we say, occupying my time from a bicycle adventure standpoint. Preview. And I may not be able to really spend a lot of time on this until the spring. So in terms of when you're going to hear about this next, it's probably not going to be until March or maybe even April. But just suffice to say, things are going to be going on in the background, and you will hear about it as I have capacity to be able to share it with you. So lots of really and of course the measurable aspects of all of this is, well, all of them have sub aspects. The bike, purchasing or building a bike, there's your measurable aspect. The mid-drive motor, I'm going to select a mid-drive motor that is 250 to 750 watts. Probably will be somewhere in the middle, who knows. And of course, last but not least, the battery, that is going to be probably one of the it's certainly the thing that is, I think it's the nerdiest aspect of all of this, but it is such a critical component to all of it. And I'm really hoping to be able to invite Brian back on the show and be able to have more of a discussion on all of that as well, because I do think that this is something I need somebody who has walked this path before to talk me through all of this too. One thing that I will say is that for the e-bike situation, I am excited about it here and now. What will happen by the time I start digging into some of the research here and start realizing what are some of the costs involved here? I could totally see myself cooling on all of this down the line. Right now, I'm super stoked about it and I'm ready to dive in, but you just never know. So that's why these sub goals I think are really, really important, to do the research on these things, because at the end of the day, I think that it would be successful if I end up identifying how I would go to build this type of a thing, even if I don't end up doing it, because I think it's going to be useful for many of you who are listening who really do want to make it happen. Or I may end up making a discovery on the e-bike that's sort of like, you know what, this building the battery is a little outside of my ability to do, or my comfort zone, and I'm going to wait for a commercially available one to come along. Or maybe I get to the point where it's sort of like the bike that I want isn't the right one, or any of a variety of different things. I may find that just by doing the research that I will find very helpful answers to this. And sometimes, even though you don't necessarily get to the point with a goal like this where I end up with an e-bike that ends up being the basis of a fall tour, for instance, which could happen, even if I end up getting to the decision point where it's sort of like, if I were to do it, I would do it this way, and this way, but I don't have the time, or the resources, the cost of it in the here and now is higher than I'm willing to spend, but maybe next year. So I think that there are some really interesting different paths to this goal that will end up having different outputs that all of them, I think, would be just as successful as fall e-bike trip down the Eastern Greenway or something like that, which actually sounds pretty cool. That would check a whole bunch of different boxes here, wouldn't it? So in any event, that is the third goal right there. And I've already gone through all of them, so I won't bother repeating them. But I am really excited about my 2024 goals. Just to do the big ones, of course, we got the e-bike here, building an e-bike with long range, or at least researching it. Number 2, exploring and enjoying my trips more and sharing them with you differently. That's number 2. And of course, new experiences for me personally, and bike travel is the other one as well. I hope that you are going out there and you are developing your list of goals for you, whether it's bicycles, whether it's bicycle adventures, whether it's other types of adventures, whether it's professional stuff. I do think this is a great time of year to consider making goals for yourself. And again, you want to set them in the first place. You want to make them specific and measurable. You want to write them down for yourself. I've got them in my notes right here. And you want to share them with other people. You don't have to do it on a podcast. Just go tell some friends. That's a very helpful way to do it. And it's more likely that you will meet the mark if you do all of those things. So I hope you hit your goals in 2024. I'm really excited to share all of the different things that help me get to a point where I can check a bunch of these boxes here on the show.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Farivar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.